I just thought, this is a pain point I'm living with in my life. How hard would it be to actually solve this?
That's
And it
cool.
turns out it wasn't very hard. And I think she, like you talk about, a lot of these things that can be really difficult about code reviews, they are not an unchangeable nature of code reviews. Hey everyone, welcome to Book Overflow. This is the podcast for software engineers by software engineers, where every week we read one of the best technical books in the world in an effort to improve our craft. I am Carter Morgan, and I am joined here, as always, by my co-host Nathan Toups. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for listening, everyone. Just at the top of the episode, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. If you're on an audio player, leave a 5-star review. If you're on Spotify, they allow comments for some reason. I think that's super weird, but you can leave a comment and we will interact with you. And thanks everyone who's joining us after our Carl Brown interview. Carl, really great guy, was super kind to let us interview him and then to shout us out in the most recent video he's done. I know that we served as somewhat of the inspiration for that, and that shout out brought in a good amount of subscribers. Yeah, it was super cool talking with Carl. What do you think about that, Nathan?
Yeah, it was really great. He's I love that he has both a mix of strong opinions and really cares about the success of other folks. And so it's been really neat to get advice from him and a signal boost. I think the YouTuber tech community that we're starting to like hook into has been really, really fun. And so I hopefully our relationship with Carl and also other folks that are starting to emerge really enrich your experience on this podcast, but also help us grow as well.
Absolutely. That's probably been our favorite part about this podcast. It's just all the fascinating people we've gotten to talk to as a result of just deciding to read a lot of books. One of those people, and it's live now, is Stephen Wolfram. That was another big get for the podcast. We really enjoyed his book, What is ChatGPT Doing and Why Does It Work? In fact, if you're listening to this episode, you might have come from the Stephen Wolfram interview, or at least stuck around after hearing the Stephen Wolfram interview. Fascinating guy, Nathan. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so cool. Can't believe that we got to chat with him, and the breadth and depth of his experience in AI and witnessing all of the new tools coming out and then seeing his worldview on it was, a very rich experience, especially after reading his book on the subject.
Yeah, we're proud of that one. Most authors are fairly easy to get a hold of. Stephen Wolfram was not. As you can imagine, he's an incredibly busy man, and there was a lot of back and forth to make that happen. And so we're just so grateful that he took time out of his day to chat with us. And we really had such a great time. Very, very generous, not only with his time, but with his knowledge. Yeah, a fantastic guy. So, if you're here for the book discussion, stick around. If you're here for the author interviews, stick around. Our goal is just to provide you best content we can, and we like to say that we want to keep a positive and inquisitive tone with this podcast. We're just here to learn. We're here to share what we're learning with you, and we hope that you're learning as well. And what we've been learning about recently is code reviews, because we've been reading the book on code reviews. This week wraps up our discussion of Looks Good to Me by Adrienne Braganza. That's still my favorite title out of any book we've done. So Looks Good to Me, what's that about? It's the book introduction you get off Amazon is Looks Good to Me offers a unique approach to delivering meaningful code reviews that goes beyond superficial checklists and tense critical conversations. Instead, you'll learn how to improve both your applications and your team dynamics. And who is Adrienne Braganza? She is a Filipina software engineer who traded scrubs for code. Adrienne Braganza is the best-selling author of Coding for Kids, Python, an international speaker, and a LinkedIn learning instructor reaching tens of thousands of students. Her curiosity and knack for deciphering developer concepts has taken her to tech conferences worldwide. When not crafting code or captivating audiences, she's exploring new cultures and cuisine with her husband, indulging in coffees and pastries, or losing herself in strategy games, the best of which is Age of Empires 2, according to her, a woman with good taste. So, like we said, we discussed the first half of this last week. And we did mention last week, we'll mention again, this is an early access preview. Adrienne was kind enough to share it with us, but you can just straight up buy it if you'd like. We always include Amazon links to the books in the description below. Those are affiliate links. You're welcome to find the book your own and buy it outside of our affiliate link. We don't mind. But if you like supporting the podcast, that's a great way to help us out. But you can also get a copy of the early access preview if you'd like. And yeah, we've really been enjoying finishing out this book. Nathan, what are your thoughts on the second half of Looks Good to Me?
Yeah, I thought this was great. It followed through on all of the momentum that was picked up in the first half, and it covered two areas that I really appreciate. I think folks who listen or view the podcast know that I love it when there are sections on how things can go wrong and how to fix those. And that's what, chapters 6 through 13 really dive into sort of the patterns and anti-patterns that can emerge. I also really loved the closer, which the final chapter is on AI tools in the code review process. And while I think a lot of folks have had interactions with AI tools in in coding itself, the specialized tools for code reviews is really fascinating, and it's a world I hadn't spent much time thinking about. And I don't know, it'll be fun to dive into that section. What about you?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that occurs is I get whiplash between this and my personal reading. I just finished reading City of Mirrors by Justin Cronin. It's the final book in the Passage trilogy, which is like a post-apocalyptic vampire novel, and it was really depressing and sad. And so then I would go from like reading that to reading this, and Adrienne just has such a positive, uplifting tone throughout the entire book. So it kind of cracked me up switching back and forth between the two, an unlikely pair. I mean, this book it's all about code reviews. I'll be honest, for me, I don't think I necessarily wanted to learn this much about code reviews, right? That doesn't mean that it's a bad book. I think it's a very, very well done book. And I just think for myself at this point in my career, I feel comfortable about where I'm at with my code reviews. And she says that plenty in the book. She's like, hey, if you feel good about this part of what you're doing with your code reviews, skip this section, move on to the next section. And if I had been reading this not for a podcast, I would have skipped a lot more sections. Not because I think that there's bad advice. I think there's great advice, but a lot of it I read and was like, okay, yeah, I think I kind of get this. But saying that, like, it is the book on code reviews. I am not familiar with any book that goes into as much detail. There are lots of books that will touch on the idea of code reviews. No book that talks about just code reviews. She has clearly put tons and tons of thought into this. It's not wordy, I would say. It's a very easy, breezy read. There's not a lot of filler. It's just a lot of detail and well thought out concepts on code reviews. I really appreciate the focus on team dynamics. I think that's something, I'm a big believer that no great piece of software was ever written entirely by one person. The one exception being like maybe Stardew Valley. And I think sometimes we as software engineers think of the team as an unfortunate hassle in getting to great software. I've always been more interested in the team than the software. So I can tell that Adrienne also really thinks hard about team dynamics. And yeah, I think there are some people, you kind of read some programming books and think, well, this is an excellent programmer who wanted to share their ideas. And so they just kind of had to write a book to do it. But I don't know if they're like a natural born author. I think Adrienne has a real talent for writing. I think she has a real has a real passion for it, and it really comes across in this book. So, it all depends. If you really, really want to learn about code reviews, this is the book for you. For me, I don't know how much I wanted to learn about code reviews, so it was fascinating.
This is interesting to me because I look at this as a roadmap to looking for weaknesses in process, which I think can exist anywhere, right? Especially if you have a team member who's struggling or you're under pressures. And so you might be very fortunate that you're in organizations that have highly functional processes, but I can guarantee you that you're going to not always be in that situation. And I think that you'll probably look back on this book with more, I think that you'll probably look back on this and be thankful that you have the tools to communicate where the dysfunction is. I think I will say Carter and myself diverge in our careers in that I've been around, he's got one really bad dysfunction that he's had to deal with. I've had lots of little dysfunctions that I've had to deal with. And so maybe it's just that I've felt a lot more pain, and why I appreciated, even though, again, I'm very happy with the code review process and most of the interactions that I've been in. But I haven't had the tools to talk about it. And so, this is, I think you're right. Like maybe this isn't felt as useful to you right now because you're in these like really great environments. But as I think of it with my like Book Overflow hat on, if I see somebody struggling, I'm like very happy to say, oh, there's this book. You need to learn.
Absolutely.
You need to, shore up on that.
And I will say that I like about books, sometimes you'll read a book and you don't learn a ton from it, but it's really great just to kind of confirm your priors and to think, okay, this is someone who spent a lot of time thinking about this, an expert in the subject matter, and we're on the same page. So even if you don't learn a ton, it can still be great to realize, it's just one of those little sanity check things. But I would agree. I mean, some books just speak differently to me. I've worked at a lot of places that deal with like scale at like a massive capacity. And so I really resonate when we read some books about that. Like, how do you manage lots of, like, I loved web scalability for startup engineers. Like that really rang true to me, despite not having just working in one little startup. And even then that didn't deal a ton with like scalability issues. So yeah, different strokes for different folks. I did not like the book. It's just, again, it's a testament to like the author accomplished what she wants to do. This, I kind of think almost about like the Fast and the Furious movies. I'm not saying this is the Fast and the Furious of books, but it's more like the Fast and the Furious movies, not my cup of tea. I can watch them though and realize like, hey, you know what? For what they're trying to do, they're doing a really good job at it. Like if you want to watch like action heroes drive cool cars, and like there's not a better movie in the world for you. And that's just kind of where I'm at with this book, where like if you want a book on code reviews, there's not a better book in the world. And I hope some of you are listening to this and thinking like Nathan was saying, like, oh my gosh, our code review process is a nightmare. Like if your code review process is a nightmare, like, yeah, this is the place to look. If you're someone who feels comfortable with your code reviews, I think it's still a good read and that you'll have fun reading it. And when you wind up at a place where you don't have such solid processes, this is the first book you'll turn back to. Reading it in the moment, I think, like I said, it was good to have some of my priors confirmed, but mostly I feel good about where I'm at. That's we usually talk about that kind of stuff more at the end, but we front loaded a bit this time. We're going to take a quick break, and when we're back, we will have some discussion about looks good to me. And so we'll take a quick break. And we are back. So like we've alluded to throughout the podcast, these code reviews are something that I feel like I've had a good handle on, but I know a lot of people don't. And Nathan, you've said that that's something that you've struggled with throughout your career, or at least the places you've been at have had code review processes that aren't great. And if that is you, there is a whole chapter 7, titled How Code Reviews Can Suck. And there's lots and lots of great stuff in here. Nathan, I know, like you've been saying, this is something that you've felt kind of profoundly in your career. What stood out to you in this whole section?
Yeah. So, I mean, hopping around early stage startups or even mid stage startups, the culture is what dictates the processes. And I thought that the way that this book identified like what can suck about code reviews, especially if you don't really know why, you're like, I know I have to do these, or these things come up. There's like 3 sort of key areas that the book brings out that I thought was really good framing. So one is the lazy code review. And this actually gets to the title of the book, of the LGTM, or looks good to me. again, we've talked about this. There's like appropriate use of LGTM. If you really do need a rubber stamp on something that's really simple, like a chore, dependency bump or some other thing, I think that that's completely appropriate. But sometimes you'll have this, maybe you created some huge PR or there's something and somebody just rubber stamps it and says LGTM and doesn't really give you that feedback. Obviously, that can cause all kinds of problems. There's the other two briefly, and then I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Carter, is the mean code review, right? Which is like another reason they can suck is that the person's mean. They're really dismissive or standoffish, that the review can actually like damage team dynamics. I've definitely seen this. If you catch somebody on a grumpy day, I'm not saying maybe I've also been a mean reviewer at one point. And then the shape shifting code review. I think that's the other sort of area where it becomes unmanageable because of frequent changes under the review. So this could be the fact that like maybe the code review is not ready yet, or maybe they're getting feedback that is causing such substantial changes that you have this moving target, and so that can be like frustrating for the reviewer themselves. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, we were struggling with this at work the other day where we just kind of split off the team, which is great because our previous team was, in my opinion, too big. I think we were approaching like 18 or 20 engineers,
Wow.
which, yeah, just way too big in my opinion. And so we split it off. And so I'm on the smaller team now. We're actually 3 and are going to grow it to 5. So I'm feeling a lot better with that. But we were having a problem where we were seeing like code reviews come in and someone would have implemented a feature or made some change to the architecture. And kind of we as the more senior engineers were looking at me like, oh, no, this is all wrong. But by the time you get to the code review, it's like all the work has been done, right? And so we were in this awkward position where we didn't want to like shut people out and say, no, you have to redo the whole thing. It led to a discussion about how we can be more involved in the early steps, making sure tickets are more clearly defined. But you just talk about kind of the shape shifting code reviews. I think our team handled it that way and said, I think because she talks about this in the first half of the book too. Like you have to figure out what is your criteria for what you're trying to get out of a code review. I lean more towards the code review is to catch like style decisions, bugs, potential implementation errors. But if you're getting to the code review and saying, let's rework the entire thing, then something's gone wrong in your planning process up until that point. But I've been in code reviews where like that shape-shifting thing just sits hard, or I don't know, that hits hard to me because I have submitted code and I hate getting in that loop where it's like the senior engineer will find like 3 things that they think are wrong with it. And so then you will fix those 3 things. And you think, okay, good, I found those 3 things. You resubmit it, and then they find 3 things, other things that are wrong with it. Maybe one of them is one of the things you changed, and then 2 of them are things that they just didn't address before. So you submit it. And then, at one place I worked, I had a particular senior engineer who like that was their modus operandi. And it was a really, really frustrating process. I'm like, if you just give me all the feedback in the first iteration, then we could just get it done and be over with. So yeah, like I've definitely been part of code reviews where it's not the most fun thing.
That's interesting. So do you think maybe that was a culture of like the guidelines were a little off, or that there's like maybe that person was distracted and so they kind of like breezed over it and then didn't do as thorough of an initial review as that you'd hoped for?
I think that's probably part of it. I remember this engineer, they were the only senior engineer on the team, and so they were pretty busy. I also think this is the company I worked at, it was the big cloud provider I worked at. And so there's almost like a very set in its way of doing things there. And you're kind of inheriting a large legacy of how engineers have operated there for years and years and years. And so I felt like it was very stodgy. And I felt like if I had come in and kind of been like, hey, I just read looks good to me, and they recommend doing this, and this, or like the idea of like a team agreement, like she talks about in the first half. I don't think it would have been received well, but I don't think that. I don't think it's because it looks good to me is wrong. I think it looks good to me is right. I just think that place had a little bit like, hey, bud, we've been doing this for 20 years and we know how to do this. And we don't really need you who just joined to come and recommend any changes to our processes. We just need you to come here and be a warm body to
Wow.
to fix the bugs.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that actually, this ties in really well with the chapter after how to make them suck less, which is decreasing code review delays. Because I think
Yes.
that actually is a huge pain point, right? And one thing she brought up was she brought up in the book, I think that was interesting, is again getting back to making clear guidelines. I think we have this conversation a lot, even outside of code reviews, is setting expectations when I'm doing platform engineering, which is, the engineers want to do what's expected of them if it's clearly laid out. It gives us a real easy way to have a communication on like what is production readiness, right? Like we do this a lot with internal developer platform kind of tooling that we're working on. What is production readiness? Like if we have a fuzzy definition, if every team gets to kind of implement it themselves. But one of the ones I thought she identified really well, and it seems like it even touches on the pain point, is this overloading of senior level engineers, right? They end up inevitably being the domain expert. They end up being the one linchpin for doing all these code reviews. And I've been in this position too, where I'm like overworked, too busy. I'm also the blocker. I have to be there because we agreed on the process. And maybe I don't always do my proudest work, or maybe I'm scatterbrained and I get like, I catch the three things and then I see that you like took my feedback and then I'm like, oh wait, there's like 5 other things that I missed the first time. And I'm sure that drives you crazy, right? Like anybody, I've been in the same receiver side of that too. And I'm like, ugh, like it's not a fun thing for sure.
Yeah, it's as we've been reading through these books, one of the things I've taken away is this idea that if you're afraid to touch the code base, or yeah, so I guess if you're afraid to touch the code base, and that means something's gone wrong. And I think part of the way fear of touching the code base manifests is that idea of like the senior reviewer has to approve everything. You want to have your automated processes so good that the senior engineer doesn't have to have their eyes on every single thing they've written. I actually had a fun little moment last week where I had to make some changes to one of our data flow pipelines, and it was just one of those things where in the past I would have been nervous to change it because I'm like, this one is an important pipeline. It's kind of piping in, it's piping in some important data and transforming it to other important data. And I'm like, if I mess this up, then it's it could be a big deal. But I actually remembered reading Refactoring by Martin Fowler. I'm like, oh, this is a perfect place to do a test. And so I actually wish that I had done in that particular moment test-driven development for because I knew what the ultimate result had to be, and I wish I had kind of just written the test for this new feature I had to add, and then worked backwards from that. And I didn't. I think it resulted in me kind of fumbling around a little too much. But ultimately, when I did make the test, or sorry, when I did make the feature, writing a test was just a really great way to be confident that I hadn't broken the rest of the pipeline. And I was fortunate that the pipeline had tests written for it previously. And so not only could I validate my new functionality with the test, but I was able to validate that all the old functionality was still there. So that's just an example there. This is an automated process that can help you feel more confident manipulating the code base. But when you talk about overloading the senior engineer because they have to approve every single pull request, that's a sign to me that you have not invested enough in other forms of automation and that you're just creating a lot of toil for the more senior members of your team.
Right. Yeah, and I think this is especially true in small teams where you're brand new or you're transitioning from founder code. So this is like one of the problems with early stage startups is that typically the founder wrote some code, probably not with all the best practices, and probably cranking it out real quickly and iterating, and that code base has to transition. And so a lot of times early on, some founding engineers or some other early hires become sort of the gatekeeper of that code. And it's the scarier code. It's the stuff that is more brittle and can break. And so if you're not deliberate about designing these processes, automating, federating ownership, things like this, you can easily slip into this. And I think, it seems like even mature teams though can, right? Like if you made some novel implementation of it, like of course, like we'll get, Sally to do the review. She's the one who wrote the caching implementation. And yeah. And I think one of the other cool things I liked, they give you, this book gives you strategies for dealing with it. One of them is also, hey, if there's a high risk of burden, see if you can break your PR into smaller increments, right? Like some of this seems obvious, especially with teams who have more mature processes or are better at writing Jira tickets that are more streamlined. But like I've seen this happen before where I've fixed something and then I also realized that there's like this bigger pattern that I want to also refactor. And even though it all makes sense to be atomic, it maybe is a burden on the code review process. And so I have to try to get creative on, well, can I break this out? Like, can I do this refactor as a separate PR and then just make sure that I don't distract the reviewer with, hey, you said you're fixing this bug, but you've also like rewritten this code in these like 3 tests that don't seem to have anything to do with it. Like, don't do that. Have empathy for your reviewer. And, it's always a dance, right? It's what it seems like.
Well, and what I love with this book, it fits that pattern I've seen from reading lots of other software engineering books, is that sometimes there'll just be a big part of software engineering that like you hate, but you think like, well, this is just something I have to put up with. This is just something, it's part of being a software engineer. And you might think huge pull requests are one of those things, right? Because you write a huge feature and we all hate reviewing them. And so you might think, I guess I just have to do this. It's really nice to hear someone say like, hey, just break it down into smaller pull requests. Like have a team rule that, you can't have one that big. Or if you're creating big, huge pull requests, then you need to be refining your tickets better. This is a funny example from my personal life, but my boys love playing Nintendo and I love playing Nintendo with them. But we have upstairs, we have a loft and we have like a kind of a sectional couch up there. Our nice couches are downstairs. That's kind of our old ratty sectional. And I've told the boys, I say, this is the jumping couch. If you want to take the cushions off and make a fort, or, they like to stack them all up in a big tower and just jump off of them, I say that's totally fine. But upstairs is also where the Nintendo is, and the TV. And then with that too, we didn't have any good charging solution for any of like our pro controllers. So the boys would be like, let's play Nintendo. And I was like, well, first we got to find the Nintendo. Then we've got to all move the family upstairs where all the toys are too. And so I got to make sure that the baby Thomas, the floor is clear for him so he doesn't choke on anything. And now I got to track down these controllers and I don't know if they're charged. And I was just realizing, like, I like playing Nintendo with the boys. The boys like playing Nintendo with me. We would play Nintendo a lot more often if I didn't have to worry about the couch being pulled apart, if I didn't have to worry about the floors being cleared, if I just knew the controllers were charged.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, how long would it take to, like, invest in my lifestyle to make this a possibility? And so I just got a second Nintendo Switch dock. I put it downstairs with the nice TV. I bought a couple nice like wireless control or charging mounts for our controllers. And then like that solved everything because now we can they just grab the controllers that are always fully charged out of their room. We can just play downstairs where it's always safe for the baby because we make sure that the downstairs is always clean. And just been a really positive addition for our family culture. But I was just thinking about that. And I actually think that my decision to do that came as a result of having read this book and other books, because I just thought, this is a pain point I'm living with in my life. How hard would it be to actually solve this?
That's
and
cool.
It turns out it wasn't very hard. And I think like you talk about, a lot of these things that can be really difficult about code reviews, they are not an unchangeable nature of code reviews. They're solvable problems.
This is a great segue into the chapter after that, chapter 8, which is eliminating process loopholes, right? So
I think that's chapter 9, actually.
Oh, was that chapter 9? Oh, you're right. Sorry. Yeah. Chapter 9, eliminating process loopholes. And what's interesting is that, if you aren't as diligent as Carter on like fixing your process, you easily could have skirted around it saying, you know what? I'll just keep an extra eye on my baby and make sure They don't
Yeah.
put toys in their mouth, right? So like just this one time, and of course this is where all the problems come from, because you're like, you might be in the middle of Mario Party and you're not paying attention, and all of a sudden a Lego gets in a mouth. And they're, one of the quotes for this section is like, loopholes can exist in the best code review processes and emerge over time. Keep a vigilant eye out for them. And yeah, this is I think this is the sort of the other side again. If you're not careful about the culture of maintenance and improving processes, this is where, especially things like the emergency code review, right? Oh, you get in firefighter mode, you start putting out stuff all the time, and then you start allowing, oh, just this one time, you're going to be able to like approve your own PR and then push it through. And I think this is a really, again, really interesting area to think about with like, if you have undefined processes, if you have misaligned tools and configuration, organizational pressures. This is where I've experienced a lot of the pain, is that you'll get pressure from the non-technical stakeholders. So this might be product if they have a lot of sway. This might even be the CEO, because the CEO has a lot of sway. They say, hey, we really got to get this feature out. And then you compromise, right? You compromise on your processes. And then, of course, it's almost always a mistake. Because you do it and then the demo breaks, and then the CEO is trying to raise money, gets super embarrassed and goes, why are you writing terrible code? Why are you doing it this way? And you're like, of course you can't just say, because you asked me to, because at the end of the day, to get back to like Uncle Bob, you're a professional. It's your job to say no. This is a interesting little piece here. Do you have any experiences of like sidestepping your process that you knew you shouldn't have done?
Not necessarily that I shouldn't have done. I actually thought she has a great quote when she talks about taking care of emergencies. She says, when emergencies happen, there should be procedures to address them. What your team needs to do, however, is make the procedures intentionally tedious so that no one would consider taking advantage of them. In a true emergency, extra steps, lots of documentation requiring approvals are warranted. In a scenario where someone just wants to skip the code review because they don't feel like it, it'll be really unappealing to even consider. And this was that large cloud provider, like to a T. Maybe not so much as like code reviews, but especially any sort of operational tasks. They had this form. If you've worked at this place or know what it is, I'm giving it away right now. The MCM, Model Change Management, where if you wanted to do anything, like let's say you need to update a value in like a DynamoDB table, you would need to you would need to write out like this kind of whole form for exactly why you need to do that, why it's important, how you're going to do that, rollback steps for if things go wrong, all the possible side effects. So when I heard like make it intentionally tedious, I'm like, oh, maybe that form was intentionally tedious and not just accidentally tedious. Because you would do stuff like that during emergencies.
Right.
I guess during an actual emergencies, like the system was down, you could default and just get approval from one other engineer, but there was no like cowboy coding and just getting in and fixing it all by yourself. I don't know. Have you ever worked at a place that like really glamorizes like firefighter culture?
Oh yeah. So again, the company I'm currently in, we've had a bunch of acquisitions, and so it's really been interesting to see the culture differences inside of the same company, because we've basically acquired other company cultures. And there's one team in particular that they're just in constant firefighter mode. They have so much tech debt that and I will tell you, you can get sort of a dopamine rush
Oh, I
from
agree.
doing this, right? And it's really dangerous, right? Because this team it causes a lots of other things. It's like if you watch those like performers who do like the spinning the plates, right? And they're like spinning all these plates, and you're seeing them run around, and obviously there's a threshold where if you have too many plates spinning, they're going to start falling. There's no way you literally can't just like go back and speed them up. And firefighter mode feels like that. It feels like you're being a hero, and you're like, why are you spinning all these plates? Like, what are we doing here? Like, is this the game worth playing? And yeah, I think, again, the flow of this book, I think we've talked about this, eliminating these process loopholes leads you right into this sort of emergency playbook, because they say, hey, look, here's all these loopholes. These are super toxic for a lot of reasons. But emergencies happen. And like, this is why we should have a playbook. This is why we should add some friction. I guess a lot of product manager folk talk about this, right? There's certain things that if you make them too frictionless, you'll get the user to behave in a way that you don't want them to. And so you add friction to certain interactions to make sure that if they do it, it's very deliberate. And I think it's the same thing with, hey, we have to have flexibility in our process. Sometimes things we can't imagine might come up, right? And these could be emergency security patches. It reminds me of like Log4j that happened a few years ago, right? People lost their minds, understandably, because it was a acute existential threat where you could exploit servers like with script kiddie off the shelf vulnerability compromises, and freaking out and using your emergency playbook in that case made a ton of sense, right? And so that's a good example of you don't do an FDR, an FRD, and do 6-month planning cycle to figure out what your Log4j, transition plan is. Like, no, you got to like patch a bunch of stuff really quick. And hopefully the 6-month plan is like, how do you refactor your code so you don't even need Log4j?
Yeah, I think the follow-up is important with emergencies. Because you're right, there's a real dopamine rush from solving the problem. I remember getting paged and being in those sorts of calls where, something's gone wrong. And especially like the best, there's like a spectrum, right? If it's a really trivial issue that like you just have to like flip a switch and then it kind of readjusts itself, like that's no fun, especially if you're getting paged like in the middle of the night. If it's something where you have no idea what's going on and you just spend the whole time lost and confused and sad, like that's the worst. But there's this juicy middle section where it's still somewhat challenging, but you know enough about the system and the context surrounding it that you have to kind of like reason about it and solve it. And then you bring the system from red to green. Like, oh, it's such a dopamine rush. It was the only time I've ever felt in my life like I love like Apollo 13, right? And feeling like the NASA engineers helping get the ship back to Earth. And like it's a huge dopamine rush, but you have to be careful that once you finish, there's still a lot of work to be done. She talks about the communication steps after. She says, once the emergency has been resolved, it's easy to feel like the job is done. The hard part is, for sure, but an often forgotten next step is to communicate what actually happened. Depending on your organization, this can be a thorough and formal process, or as simple as bringing it up at the next meeting. Be sure to check with your security and compliance teams to see if any formal report is needed from their end. This is where the emergency procedure execution record we discussed previously comes in real handy. The information captured there would be critical to have on any kind of report. What's your experience with this, Nathan, with debriefs or postmortems on big incidents?
Yeah, postmortems are so important. It's the only way the organization. So especially if you're doing blameless postmortems, right, which we've advocated for in the past. Yes, an individual may have pulled the trigger to cause the failure, or some bad code might have gotten into a server that somebody in the company wrote and somebody else reviewed. But the only way that the organization itself makes itself more resilient is to have these review processes. It says, a lot of times you'll hear things like the 5 whys or these other sort of methods for getting down to the root cause. And it's the only way that you can go in and say, okay, was this an Italy event, which we've talked about in like the frozen caveman pattern, where it's such a rare thing that we actually did have the best plan in place and it's just like a freak accident? That's very rare. It very rarely happens. Most of the time, though, there's some procedural amendment that needs to take place. And you only do it by kind of getting all of the directly responsible individuals in the right room, talking about what happened. Sometimes maybe your technical implementation was correct, but maybe communication to the customer was wrong, right? Like I've had that plenty of times where we maybe didn't detect something quickly enough, but we actually had good processes for remediating it. Or we detected it, but we didn't communicate to the customer that we knew something was going on and they got mad, right? Which is completely understandable. And so sometimes the postmortem isn't even about like some fundamental bug in your code that you have to fix with this process. It's literally where did we fail? How could we have gotten our mean time to recovery faster? Was this a failure in our code review process, right? Which is a good tie-in here. When we did use the emergency playbook, did it work like we expected, right? Like these are all super good questions to ask. But yeah, I feel like this is one of those culture moments where I've also seen teams that skirt over this to their own peril, right? They don't learn it, and again, it gets in. We learn about all these patterns. It's another form of the Groundhog Day problem, which is that, okay, well, SQL got to 100% CPU for the third time this month. We kind of, sort of claimed that we had a fix, but we didn't really. And the fact that it came up 2 more times shows that we didn't really understand the problem. I would almost guarantee you that we skirted over the postmortem in a way that it should have been done.
And it's, just as we talk about this, what keeps coming back to my mind is the idea of like, well, what if you don't have time? What if the CEO wants to move at like a really fast velocity and you don't have time to do this? And if you're listening to this and thinking that, my best advice would be go read Clean Coder by Uncle Bob.
Yep.
Because like you were saying, Nathan, there's a point where you just have to put your foot down and say, I am a professional. Right. What I produce is the code and the processes around delivering the code. And a professional does not produce subpar product.
Yep.
And maybe it does just require you putting your foot down and saying, we're not going to do it that way because we need to have postmortems. We need to have an emergency playbook. We need to have a process for reducing this sort of toil. Otherwise you wind up in a place that just really glamorizes firefighting. And that's a lot of places. It's tough. It's tough to be a force for institutional change. Probably outside the scope of this book.
Yeah, no, this is good. And, I think this is also, this is a perfect time to take a break because the last section is actually the one I'm most excited about. It's how the interaction between the new AI tools, how you pair programming with code reviews and something called mob programming, which I had never heard of before. So we'll get to all of that after this break.
Yeah, so like Nathan said before the break, these last 3 chapters focus on pair programming, something called mob programming, and there's a whole chapter on AI, which Adrienne kind of says, like, yeah, and not like we have to talk about this because there's lots of great stuff in that, but she's like, you can't write a book in 2024 and not have a chapter on AI. And she does a great job with it. So let's start talking about pair programming first. That's what the whole focus of chapter 11 is. So pair programming, if you're not familiar, I mean, it is what it sounds like. You and another engineer will partner. There's lots of different ways you can pair program. She talks about the classic driver navigator. One person codes, the other person kind of directs. The Pomodoro technique, where maybe you switch off every 25 minutes. What's the name of it? Do you remember the name of it, Nathan? I don't remember exactly, but the one where one person will write the test, the other person writes the code to implement the test, and then that person, after writing the code, will write the test for the next feature and then hand off. I don't remember the name for that one.
I don't remember the name for that either. I know I've heard of that methodology, but I'm drawing a blank. So,
but that's like classic test-driven development.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of interesting stuff about pair programming in this chapter. Nathan, anything that jumped out to you, or anything that in your career, any experiences you have with pair programming in general?
Yeah, so I think a couple of books back, actually more than that, a couple of books back, with a couple of what I want to do, what I learned from this book was I wanted to spend more time pair programming. I'm happy to report that I have, and there was a really great experience I had with one of our engineers where we were doing a bunch of Terraform wrangling, and Terraform is a tool for provisioning infrastructure. Very common for DevOps, but increasingly software engineers are expected to, depending on the organization you're in, are expected to interact with it a bit. And I knew that this engineer could have done it on his own, but working on it together helped eliminate this feedback loop where he'd kind of, spin his wheels a little bit, come back, ask questions. And the two of us got to work together. And I thought it was a really phenomenal experience. It ties really well into this because what's the relationship between pair programming and code reviews, right? I probably would have been the person doing the code review if I wasn't pair programming with this person, right? And the relationship here is interesting in that I shouldn't be the code reviewer if I was also doing the pair programming. And so we actually had another person who happened to be a Terraform domain expert in our group who we were able to pull in. And we actually worked on the pull request together. So it was not just the code, it wasn't just doing pair programming. We also said, hey, this is how I know our coworker likes to interact with PRs. So make sure that you bring these items up, address the thing that you're fixing here, talk about your philosophy behind, like we just made sure we had a thorough review, and it gave me the opportunity to, it was sort of a mentor mentee kind of piece, but he drove the whole time. He was writing all the code, he was doing all of this stuff. And I found myself nodding in approval with the way that she framed things here. Because again, we were able to onboard him to our processes. This was a new kind of way of doing Terraform. I was able to detect issues that he was kind of running into, like the abstraction was in the wrong spot, very easy pitfall to do with Terraform. And then we were able to, it helped our camaraderie, right? We were able to solve this problem. We were very proud because we were like, oh man, we spent 2 hours on this. And this was probably like a 1.5 day turnaround if you had just kind of gone off on your own. So it's very rewarding, right? And I was able to coach him on how to engage with the Terraform pull request, right? So I was like, look, you need to make this as easy as possible. These are the things. He's going to probably ask these, or give this sort of. You could kind of give like a pre-code review in pair programming before you handed it off to another person. And yeah, I thought this was really, really interesting. I would love to hear if you've had any experiences like this as well.
I said it last week and I stand by it. It's just something I'd like to be better at, pair
Yeah.
programming. Obviously, I've been in scenarios where, you're stuck on a bug and so you hop on and you kind of work something out with someone. I've been in plenty of scenarios where uh, you hop on a call or meet in person to get some context on a part of the system. I don't know how many times I've been in like a pure pair programming, like let us sit down, write the code together. Definitely nothing as organized as like the test driven development handoff or the Pomodoro technique. I don't quite have the institutional sway right now, but I've thought like I think you might just need to mandate this just because like pair programming is always going to be the more difficult thing to do. Like it just you have to sync people's schedules up. It takes two engineers and put them on one problem. It's I mean a lot of engineers are more introverted, and so they don't love
Yep.
the idea of pair programming. And that's something she says. She says, I know you're probably thinking if someone is that stubborn or averse to collaboration, that's a big problem to deal with. The truth is, pair programming is quite difficult for anyone to get used to, even extroverted developers, which I
Yep.
felt. I mean, I consider myself an extroverted developer, right? We have a podcast for crying out loud. And even I feel a little like, I don't know if I want to pair program on this. I just like it to be quiet. I'd like to kind of go at my own pace. I don't know. Part of me wonders if you just have to say, we are pair programming now, and we're just
Yeah.
going to do it every single day, and we're just going to get used to it.
So mine emerged kind of impromptu. We were in our daily stand up. We kind of went over, the normal ritual if you're doing, Scrum type daily stand ups is what I got done yesterday, what I'm working on today, and what blockers I might have. And I noticed a little bit of apprehension in one of the engineers' voice, and I just happened to have the next 2 hours free. And so literally it just was like, hey, why don't we pair up on this? I literally offered it up in the stand up, and it was accepted, and we went with it. And I mean, again, both of us were so happy with the outcome. I will say one caveat, and I know I kind of touched on this saying like I helped also craft the PR was and for the uninitiated PRs are pull requests, which is what you submit to get a code review. If you're not careful, what happens here? There's a couple things. Number one, it's really important you write down what happened in your pair programming, because you can miss historical records if, for instance, we pair programmed and I just accepted the change, right? Like, let's say we didn't go to an external party. Let's say there's only 2 people and I'm the other person. You can miss stuff. So make sure that you think about the fact that if you weren't pair programming, you would be writing this stuff down, making it really clear and making sure that it was there. So don't lose on the fact that, like, don't lose out on the historical record. Historical records are a gift to yourself and others in 6 months. The other one was that, a code review and a PR and a pair programming really do serve 2 different purposes. And, she brings this up in the chapter as well, which is they complement each other. It's not a one or the other. And yeah, making time for it. I will say, though, it was one of those things where I think if I hadn't read all these books recently, I probably wouldn't have offered up doing pair programming. And I had other things I could have been working on. But it turned out to be a huge net positive. So I don't know, give it a try, and doing this in the sense of, can I help this person get the best PR possible, right? Like if you're in a position like that, or if you need help, right? Don't be afraid to ask a peer or a senior dev on your team and say, look, I think that pair programming would help me here. I feel like it's going to take me 2 days of like going off on a mountain and, doing a bunch of research. Or if you have a couple hours of your day, can we pair up and, tag team this thing? I think if the outcome is a good change management process where you have the best pull requests possible, maybe you're a little intimidated by the person that is going to do the code review, right? Again, we get back to this thing of like, oh, okay, it's, Sally's doing the code review. This is her caching service, but Bobby has worked on the caching service before. I'd like to pair up with Bobby, right? Like maybe this could be a good pair programming exercise. Just, read your team, see what the understanding is there. And I think that would be a really great way of going about it strategically.
And Adrienne even recommends pairing with people at your level. Not necessarily if you're a new engineer, like, okay, let me go find the staff engineer and pair with him or her. But, if you have 2 junior engineers on the team, she recommends just pairing together because you'll figure out how each other works. 2 heads are better than 1. She says even things like you might learn keyboard shortcuts that you didn't know.
Oh, so many cool things. Oh,
yeah.
I've been using Docker the wrong way the whole time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think, just like you said, Nathan, like if you are a senior on your team, I would really encourage you to be the one who offers to pair program, because that, obviously as a junior, you don't want to be like, can you give me a couple hours of your time to fix this quick bug? So if you're a senior, please be the one driving that change. But if you're a junior, just pair with other juniors if you can. You'd be surprised at what you can learn. And just before we get into the AI stuff, I just want to touch on mob programming, which is like pair programming, but with more people.
It's a mob. You actually get a mob of people.
And something she says, she talks about how you can have more than just programmers. There's 2 developers, a product owner, a tech lead, and DevOps engineers walk into a conference room. After a few hours, they walk back out with a caching solution that finally works. I thought that was fascinating, the idea of having like a product owner or like a non-technical person as part of your mob.
Yeah, I've definitely been in the trenches where we've rapidly prototype something or come up with a plan. There's a really great book called Sprint. I don't think it's on our backlog. It's much more like how to do a startup and iterate quickly kind of book. Maybe that'll get in the backlog one day. I never thought of it as a mob programming technique, but it is. You basically have every stakeholder involved, and you, instead of having these long proposal cycles, literally every decision maker's in the room and you just hash it out. I've also seen this in triage modes where, you realize that it's a Sev 0 or Sev 1, severity 1 or severity 0, which is like, the website's down or some fundamental function of the website is not working. You might have a group of folks, triages, troubleshooting, doing a bug fix, talking about the trade-offs that might happen. Hopefully that's not the main way that you're doing mob programming. But I've seen that sort of naturally manifest itself. It's really interesting. I'd never thought of it called mob programming. I've never heard anyone talk about it this way, but I think it's also just like, it would be very interesting to see if there's like a deliberate way to kind of jolt a process to get buy-in and, not have to do like 3 weeks of iteration on proposal documents and just like knock it out. It's a cool idea. Yeah.
I love the world of asynchronous communication, and obviously there's so many benefits from it. I am very much like if we could just talk about this in person for a couple minutes, like we could clear up a lot of misconceptions. And so mob
Yeah.
programming is kind of like the extreme version of that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's get us all together working on the feature at the same time. Now, she talks about risks there, because if you have a mob of 20 people, 18 of them are going to tune out, right?
Yep.
So you've got to find that balance. How that works for you and your team is going to depend. But I just remember the first place I worked at, this wasn't mob programming, but I just remember being in like these planning meetings for this project. I remember there being like 25 people in the room.
Oh yeah,
And
I've
like,
been in these.
yeah, like 2 or 3 people talking 90% of the time. And I just remember I was young in my career. I'm like, well, I guess this is what work is like. And since then it's been like, oh wait, that was a really
That's the
bad
worst,
use
right?
of time. Yeah.
And she talks about this. She says that, that you get into the groupthink, right? The idea is that these 1 or 2 personalities kind of take over, and then everybody's sort of either like checked out, or they don't feel empowered to speak up. And so you get a false consensus, right? You get this like theater that says,
Yeah.
oh, it looks like we all agree, but really just like we're tired of John talking. Like, we don't want to hear John talk anymore. John, please stop talking.
Yeah.
And so John gets his way, right? Like John goes, oh yeah, we should do it this way. And, kind of shoots down some other ideas, and people just kind of agree to it. And then of course what happens is later they go, oh, that was not a good plan. And then, if it's really a toxic environment, everyone dogpiles John, but they were all in the room. So, yeah.
Well, why don't we round out the discussion then with code reviews and AI? That's what the whole last chapter is devoted to. Lots of discussion of some really interesting tools. Some tools I hadn't heard of are mentioned here. Yeah, lots of great stuff. Nathan, you had mentioned up at the top that this is one of the chapters that you really liked. What about it really spoke to you?
Yeah. So like I'm a bit of a contrarian. Like, I don't pay attention to all the AI stuff that's going on. There's a lot of other like types of computer science that I'm much more interested in. But I'm ignoring this to my own peril. I actually I just learned about a new editor called Cursor. Maybe it's not that new. It's new to me. Cursor is like a version of VS Code with like AI steroids. But and that's most of the way I think about AI tools in engineering, software engineering. But of course, there are specialty tools, right? Of course, there are tools that are very specific to like the code review process. And some of these looked really interesting. Like, particularly, there's one called like What the Diff.
Another one is, that one looked cool.
Yeah, and Codemium, which has been around a while, but Codemium has a Codemium AI. And what's cool is that like you can interact with them in the comments section of your code review. They can help you draft the template for what you're even going to like. So as the submitter, you can get these tools to help you analyze the code that's changed, outline all of the stuff to make sure that it's easier for a reviewer. But there's also things like you have a hunch that this thing needs to get changed in the code. You're the reviewer, and it's a supplement of like proposing the actual change that could take place, or giving additional context as to why something is an anti-pattern. I just never thought of it, and I thought it's such a cool supplementation, and it's exactly where I think AI tools should go, which is, it's not doing the job for us. It's augmenting our abilities to make sure that we're thorough, that we're doing what we're supposed to do, that we're not just writing LGTM, but that
the AI can do that for you now.
Exactly, the AI can do that for you. That's where you get to like Galaxy Brain, is that the AI is like LGTM. So
yeah, I find AI so fascinating. Like I say I'm like I'm an old man with AI, where like I just use ChatGPT, and I use it pretty extensively, but I just talk to ChatGPT. And I think that's one of the kind of core challenges with AI, is that people are unaware of how you use it, and people, including me, and like the different formats that it's in. Like I open up like Google Sheets, and Google Sheets is like, oh, you can use AI here. I'm like, wait, how? I don't even know like what that looks like. Do I right click and on a cell and then AI happens there? Do I type it in here? That's why I like ChatGPT, because I'm like, I can wrap my head around this. I am talking to a robot. So when we get into some of these tools, like I thought like what the diff was interesting, like you can, like you said, like flag a part of the code review and say like, hey, I think this should be this instead, and what the diff will change it for you. I just find that initial hurdle of like remembering, wait, what's what the diff command? How do I do that again? How do I interact with it exactly? To me, I find that one of the central hurdles of AI, which is what is the user interface for actually interacting with it? And I think too often it's kind of, I don't know if it's kind of fundamentally difficult to design one that humans will use in a natural way, or if it's something that we just haven't gotten used to yet, and that one day we'll all kind of get used to it. But I don't know. I mean, when the mouse, when they invented it, was very intuitive, right? The iPhone multi-touch was very intuitive. Maybe the fact that we're 2 years into this and it still isn't intuitive is a sign that it's just not going to get intuitive.
Yeah, and you never know too. Sometimes you just need a virtuoso to use the tool for it to click. So like sometimes I've seen other people use tools and I'm like, oh, that's how you're supposed to use it. One little anecdote that I loved, actually, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's the best framing on hallucination that I've ever seen. And it was from the author's like her own personal experience where she thought that "You'll Be in My Heart" and "In the Air Tonight," the songs, she swore they were by the band Genesis. And she would get in these huge debates with her friends and family. And then, and it was really weird because, you know, Phil Collins was singing these songs, but her misinterpretation, she didn't realize Phil Collins had a solo career. She thought it was in the band Genesis. And this is an interesting misinterpretation of context, right? Is that, yes, the singer is Phil Collins, but no, it was not the band Genesis, which is where he came from before he had a solo career. And this is a very similar problem that would happen in these code assistants or these AI tools is that, you know, maybe you're using a brand new framework. Maybe you're using the latest version of Next.js, and you might get feedback on an idiomatic version of, you know, 2 versions previous. And I've seen this, right, with my code assistant stuff too, is it just doesn't understand like a new, you know, idiomatic pattern has come out. And so therefore it offers up some old way of doing it. I saw this with Python code where it didn't know like the open with thing where it will narrowly scope how do you open files. And they'll use the old way where you have to like use .close and do all these other things. And it's not technically wrong, but if you like show this to any Python programmer, they're gonna be like, what are you doing? You know? And you're like, oh yeah, well, this is what the code assistant told me. I think the same thing can happen with these AI tools, and it's just something to look out for, right? Like, don't let it think for you. Yeah.
I was helping someone with they're working on a personal project. They've just started out programming, and they use ChatGPT. I had given them an assignment. I basically said, okay, traverse this list of dictionaries, and you want to find the dictionary whose ID property matches like the given value. So just write a function that does that. And they were kind of stuck with it. And so they used ChatGPT to generate something. But ChatGPT did like this one-liner like generator expression that wound up looking like 4-step in steps with step like and this person was just like, what on earth is this? And I just looked at it, and I'm not Python isn't my strong suit, and so I had to kind of really study it. And I kind of said like, ChatGPT is correct, but my goodness, just write a loop.
Right.
So yeah, and Adrienne is great about that in chapter 13, where she says like, these are tools and they're going to change and they can't do everything for you. They'll hallucinate. They're not always reliable, but there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. And it's worth looking into thinking, how could this fit into your pull requests? You know, like everything, I think you just got to ask yourself, is this making the process easier or more difficult? I've been in some pull request processes where I feel like there's kind of like a lot of AI cruft. And it's like, oh, AI, like we can have it summarize the pull request. And I don't find that incredibly useful. But there are some things in this chapter where I thought, you know, I have to give that more of a look. And that takes us to the end of Looks Good to Me.
Yep.
I think we always like to wrap up with kind of what are we going to do differently in our career as a result of reading this book, and recommendations. So Nathan, where are you at as far as what are you going to change in your career?
Yeah. To me, I want to take a closer look at these AI assisted code review tools. I ended up highlighting a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of things I want to go back and look at, and I'm sure that it's changing daily, right? But paying attention to this and making sure that I take time to do that, I think that's the big takeaway. I think the other areas, again, it's a lot of preaching to the choir, or I'll take note of them, but I don't have any action. This is something I can act on in the next, couple weeks.
Yeah, me, it's still pair programming and mob programming. Like I said, the team I'm on is 3 engineers, and we have a product owner. I'm like, it'd be good for us all to get on a call together and to work through a problem. It's again, it's just one of those things where I'm like, I just gotta bite the bullet and do it, right?
You're
But
gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, I know, right? And then as far as who would recommend this book to, Nathan, who do you think?
My recommendation is the same as last week, which is this is an all levels book. Open it when you know that you might be struggling with the code review process. If you have sway in the organization, like you're in a leadership role, it's a fantastic book to frame how you can fix organizational problems. But if you're younger in your career and you're just not familiar with what is expected of you, I think it's a great book from that perspective as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the book on code reviews. Again, I am not aware of any other book that covers it in as much detail, or as well. I mean, Adrienne is a really, really talented author. I found, like I said, the writing style is super easy, but also very informative. I said at the top of this episode, this is not the book I think I would have felt like I had to read the most at this point in my career. But I hope you got out of this episode. There's tons of great stuff in this book. And I hope you guys feel, as you follow along with this podcast, you might come to us discussing a book and thinking, yeah, maybe I'll skip this episode. It's your life. Do whatever you want. But we hope that you will stick around for all of the books we cover, because even if you might be someone like me who, I mean, I'm the person who read this book and thought maybe I'd prefer to be reading a different programming book right now. But I hope you see that there's so much great stuff in this. We got such great discussion out of it. We promise that all of the books we read, even if it's not something that that it pops up in your feed and you thought, oh, I've been meaning to get around to this, maybe it's a book you've never heard of, right? We promise that we'll deliver the best possible discussion about it that we can to you, that we'll try to make it, like we say, positive and inquisitive, relate it back to our careers, make it practical and applicable. And we hope that it'll broaden the horizons. I know that I will absolutely be keeping my eyes on Adrienne Braganza, because even if this book wasn't the subject matter I was most interested in at this point in my career, there is no doubt that Adrienne is an incredibly talented author. And I am looking forward to reading more books by her, because I thought this is the book on code review. She knocked it out of the park. I'm excited to see what comes next from her. Well, I think that about wraps us up for Book Overflow this week. As always, you can find us at Book Overflow Pod on Twitter. You can contact us at contact@bookoverflow.io. You can check out the bookoverflow.io website too. That's where we have our reading schedule, and there's links to all of the different platforms that we're on. And you can also find us. Did I say you can find us on Twitter? Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at Book Overflow Pod. You can find me on Twitter at Carter Morgan, and Nathan does Functionally Imperative. You can find that at it's functionallyimperative.com, right, Nathan?
That's it.
Okay, because the YouTube channel is Funk Imp, which I love, and that's like your handle. But functionallyimperative.com is going to be the source of truth for all of Nathan's newsletters and his other interviews with fascinating folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. We're so happy. I think we just broke 2,700 subscribers on YouTube. So we are really pleased with the growth of this podcast. And we thank you so much for being a listener. And we promise more excellent discussions to come and some exciting surprises, which are working through the pipeline. So please stick around, and thanks for tuning in. See you later, everyone.